Hey everybody. We just learned a ton about the human body, how it works, how the systems within it work, and then how those systems work together. And we learned a lot about that. We're moving on to something different now. Not only how the body works, but how I got to be different than the person next to me, or how you got different from even your brother or your sister, people with the same parents even. So we are on to genetics and how we came to have the traits that we have. Traits. Everybody, including dogs, as shown in this slide, has traits. Physical traits that make us look different. Even traits that aren't so visible are also in partly due to our genetic makeup. Dogs have been bred for certain traits too. Some dogs are great for hunting. German Shepherds are great at saving lives, like in an avalanche and stuff. Some dogs are more for companions around the house. Some to help you hunt or ranch or whatever it's been. So just as dogs have been bred to do certain things, you've seen these dogs get to the point where they don't even resemble other dogs that are the same species. Now, many of those types of dogs can't breed with others, obviously, but it's gotten to the point where there's so much variation from one dog to the next, from one breed to the next. But humans, we have different traits too. This is a picture of my family, and each 4 of my daughters has different traits. They have the same parents. It's Leah is their mom, I'm their dad, and although they do look strangely alike, these are pictures of when they were 1 year old, and they do look alike. They look like sisters, yet they've got different genetic makeup that makes them look different, act different, and makes them in general different than anybody else in the world. What makes you different than everybody else in the world? In part, it's your genes, the genetics, the alleles that have been passed down from your parents to you. We'll learn about what those terms mean in a little bit. But yeah, think of all the students in the 7th grade right now. There's a crazy number of you that have so many great similarities, but kind of what brings us all together are our differences too. We all acknowledge and should acknowledge that there's nobody else like you, and you are a valuable part of our 7th grade family because of those differences, whether those are more genetic or environmental. It's pretty cool that organisms such as us can have such different traits and that we can come together to do pretty cool stuff. All right, all of this genetic stuff started with a guy named Gregor Mendel, an Austrian guy, and he noticed some things about plants, actually, peas, just pea plants. He noticed some things about flower color, flower position, seed color is probably the famous thing that he really saw as, hey, there's something going on here. There's a certain probability that the offspring of these plants will have certain traits. There's a quick video that I'm going to show you now that displays some of that.
These days, scientists know how you inherit characteristics from your parents. They're able to calculate probabilities of having a specific trait or getting a genetic disease according to the information they have from the parents and the family history. But how is this possible? To understand how traits pass from one living being to its descendants, we need to go back in time to the 19th century and a man named Gregor Mendel. Mendel was an Austrian monk and biologist who loved to work with plants. By breeding the pea plants he was growing in the monastery's garden, he discovered the principles that rule heredity. In one of the most classic examples, Mendel combined a purebred yellow-seeded plant with a purebred green-seeded plant, and he got only yellow seeds. He called the yellow color trait the dominant one, because it was expressed in all the new seeds. Then he let the new yellow-seeded hybrid plants self-fertilize, and in this second generation he got both yellow and green seeds, which meant that the green trait had been hidden by the dominant yellow. He called this hidden trait the recessive trait. From those results, Mendel inferred that each trait depends on a pair of factors, one of them coming from the mother and the other from the father. Now we know that these factors are called alleles and represent the different variations of a gene. Depending on which type of allele Mendel found in each seed, we can have what we call a homozygous P, where both alleles are identical, and what we call a heterozygous P, when the two alleles are different. This combination of alleles is known as genotype, and its result, being yellow or green, is called phenotype. To clearly visualize how alleles are distributed amongst descendants, we can use a diagram called the Punnett Square. You just place the different alleles on both axes, and then you figure out the possible combinations. Let's look at Mendel's P's, for example. Let's write the dominant yellow allele as an uppercase Y, and the recessive green allele as a lowercase y. The uppercase y always overpowers its lowercase friend, so the only time you get green babies is if you have two lowercase y's. In Mendel's first generation, the yellow homozygous P mom will give each P kid a yellow dominant allele, and the green homozygous P dad will give a green recessive allele, so all the P kids will be yellow heterozygous. Then, in the second generation, where the two heterozygous kids marry, their babies could have any of the three possible genotypes, showing the two possible phenotypes in a 3-to-1 proportion. But even peas have a lot of characteristics. For example, besides being yellow or green, peas may be round or wrinkled. So we could have all these possible combinations: round yellow peas, round green peas, wrinkled yellow peas, and wrinkled green peas. To calculate the proportions for each genotype and phenotype, we can use a Punnett square too. Of course, this will make it a little more complex. And lots of things are more complicated than peas, like, say, people. These days, scientists know a lot more about genetics and heredity, and there are many other ways in which some characteristics are inherited. But it all started with Mendel and his peas.
All right, so genes, not blue genes, but the genes that come from a bunch of wound up DNA that make up chromosomes. Genes are the factors that control traits. You have a gene for hair color. You have genes for skin color, for the shape of your face. You've got for the length of your body. You've got all these genes that control the production of proteins that ultimately make you what you are and what you might look like and how you act, even in some cases. So genes are the factors that control traits, and they're actually sections of DNA that make up the chromosomes that are in every cell of your body. Alleles is a different term. Alleles is the different form of a gene. So if you have a typical dominant recessive trait, where you are going to either pass on one form of a gene or another, those two forms that you might have are called alleles. You'll notice that, just like the video said, that some of these are dominant while others are recessive. In the case of the pea plant, the purple flower color is dominant over white. So if you do have a heterozygous genotype, the genotype is really the combination of alleles, and heterozygous means you have one of each type of allele, and it's considered homozygous if you have only one type of that allele, either whether it's the dominant one or the recessive. So basically, if you have a heterozygous genotype, only the dominant allele or trait will show up in the phenotype. The phenotype is like the physical characteristic that is coded there. The genotype is not seen, but it's the combination of alleles that are given. Okay, so in this case, the purple flower types are probably more common if you have the same frequency of each allele, which is typically the case. All right, a lot of different traits that we have actually are controlled by that dominant or recessive trait. And some of these listed, they take more genes than just one. They take more than just one dominant recessive allele to actually make this happen. So this is oversimplified in some cases, but a lot of the traits that you have are controlled by dominant and recessive alleles in your genotype that make us up your genes. Earlobes. Do you have detached earlobes, or are they attached? Right there, I happen to have detached myself. Hair on the fingers can be a genetic thing that is controlled by your genes, the DNA. Do you have a widow's peak? I don't have much of anything up there anymore, but some people have a pronounced widow's peak where the hairline actually dips in front, and some people, believe these are two different politicians, do not. Some people can roll their tongues. Some people cannot, like that girl on the right. I can roll my tongue. I can triple roll my tongue if I really practice it and stuff. But yeah, that's kind of a genetic thing. Some people simply can't roll their tongue. Facial dimples is one of those traits that isn't so simple, it turns out. But either way, if it's controlled by one gene or multiple, dimples is another characteristic that is shared with your genes. The straight thumb, like some people, when they stick up their thumb, the thumb kind of curves away like mine does. Some people don't have the ability to curve that back quite the same way. We'll have a link to here's the chin, where it's either a smooth or a cleft, kind of like a hole there almost. But we'll have a link in the show notes here where you can take a survey and then ask your parents, where did these traits that I have, such as detached earlobes or not, or hair on the fingers, or the ability to roll your tongue, where did I get those things from? And all of your genes come from your biological mother and father. All right, we're going to talk about probability now for a little bit. You might think of like gambling or playing cards or even flipping a coin when you think of probability, and you'd be right. You probably learn about this in math too, but probability is the likelihood that a particular event will occur. In genetics, we use probabilities to predict what kind of traits offspring will have. If you roll a 6-sided dice, you have about a 1 in 6 chance of getting a 6 or getting a 1. 16.6 extended chance of doing that. If you flip a coin in general, you have a 50% chance that it will land heads. If you flip that coin 100 times, you're more and more likely to get pretty close to that 50 out of 100, or 1 in 2. Sometimes those ratios will be changed and shown differently, sometimes in percentages and sometimes as a fraction. But yeah, probability in genetics works like this when we use Punnett squares, and you might have seen this in the video. Here we have a male pea plant crossed with a female part of the plant, and it's predicted offspring using this Punnett square. Approximately half the time, if this is heterozygous, meaning it has one of the dominant alleles and one of the recessive, for half of its offspring it will pass on that dominant allele. For half of its offspring it will pass on that recessive allele. Same thing with the female side of things, passing on that large B for that dominant allele or the recessive. You'll notice there's only a 1 in 4 chance if you have two heterozygous individuals cross. Only a 1 in 4 chance that recessive allele will actually show up in the phenotype, or that physical characteristic, and 3 out of 4 will show up purple. Now, every time you do this, you might get some that end up all purple if there were 4 offspring. You might even get 4 offspring that show up white. This is just a probability. You have a 75% chance that flower on that pea plant is going to end up purple. All right, so the Punnett square is what we use with this. And the Punnett square is just a chart that shows all the possible combinations of alleles that could result. Here we have heterozygous individuals for a certain trait, and they're going to pass those T's down the line, and that is the probability of getting a certain trait in the offspring. So different, I talked about this earlier, but phenotype and genotype are very different things, but they're related to each other. Phenotype is the physical appearance. It's what you see. So for this cross, if it could be tall, for 2 out of the 3 genotypes that are listed. If there's 2 capital T's alleles passed on, it's going to be tall, and it's going to be homozygous. You would also have a tall pea plant if it was heterozygous, because the tall gene or tall allele is dominant. It would only be short if there were 2 small t's. The genotype is this side. It's the organism's genetic makeup or combination of alleles. So there's 3 different genotypes expressed here, yet there's only 2 phenotypes, and that's pretty common for dominant and recessive alleles. Not every gene is a dominant or recessive deal, though. Here we have a couple examples of where the alleles are neither dominant nor recessive. They both show up in the offspring quite equally. Here you have a red flower crossed with a white flower, and each one of the only allele that this one will pass on is that R for red, and that shows up in every one of its offspring. Same thing with the white. The white shows up, and instead of being a lowercase or recessive type of allele, there's actually codominance, and all of these offspring will end up pink. Same thing with these roosters over here. We've got black feathers on this one, white feathers on this one. Neither one of those color of feathers is dominant. They're codominant. So all of the offspring in this case would have white and black feathers. So not every case will have that dominant and recessive trait going on. So that's an intro to genetics, and we're going to get a lot of practice, a lot of good practice, some fun projects to think about and do. So let's go.